Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Mailbox for the 16th of August 2011. My name is TotalBiscuit, bringing you your daily dose of community interaction, gaming discussion, and all that good stuff. You can email in mailbox@cynicalbrit.com, that is mailbox@cynicalbrit.com, with topics for future shows. The game in the background is, I actually don't know what it is. I'm hoping it's Bastion. As I'm recording this before I get this filming done, I'm in the middle of a hotel room right now, literally in the center of it. And yes, it's not an ideal recording environment. It's my little mic stand and everything, but whatever. We'll go with what we've got. So yeah, I'm hoping it's Bastion, assuming it records properly. If not, it's going to be some random thing that I pulled together at the last minute, because of course tomorrow is Gamescom, and I'm getting this put together before I go to bed. Right, the first email comes in from Tilladon that says, I've begun to notice that it seems that League of Legends are starting to overflow and foam at the mouth with champions. They just hit 81 with Skarner, and now they have just announced it 82nd. It seems like it's getting to the point where champions are going to start repeating. I don't want to see this, and I think that Riot should focus more on balancing what they got right now, as well as bringing more maps, maybe, along with Dominion. But it seems like every other week or so we get a new champion, and we're supposed to grind out 6.3k IP. Time I do not have. So, I've stuck with my three mains and worked with them. Still, it seems like the mixing pot of champions is starting to reach critical mass. Do you think that Riot should focus on balancing what they have, making new champions, or what? I don't want to see this game die because there's no variety in it, and no one brings something interesting to the table, like, say, the classes of WoW, where every class has the same spells. Yeah, it's really difficult, isn't it? Because there are, of course, plenty of accusations about League of Legends being an imbalanced game, and I think you'd be a fool to believe that there was no imbalance in it. As to how imbalanced it really is, I suppose it really depends on what level you're playing it on. Our team's level, I believe, is somewhere around the 1,600 to 1,700 ELO mark, give or take. So we tend to run into some rather unpleasant things. But most of the time, it doesn't really come down to hero imbalance. It really comes down to what mistakes did these guys make. Once you get to the absolute top, the peak, then you get into a situation whereby people are not making mistakes, so hero balance becomes more pertinent once again. And then, of course, all the way down to the low end, hero balance can also become an issue, but in a different way. For instance, Tryndamere is considered to be an imbalanced hero by a lot of people in low ELO rankings. And the reason for that is because they don't really know how to deal with him, but he's not like a tier 1 hero, unless things have changed rapidly over the last few months and I haven't noticed. I mean, when I played regularly anyway and paid attention to tier lists, he was actually tier 4 on the Elements tier list. I don't believe he's really any higher than that. Indeed, I'm correct in that assumption. According to the website, as of today, he's still tier 4, so he's not a big deal when you get to higher ELO in 5 versus 5 draft, but he becomes a big deal in the lower levels because he's a pain in the ass to deal with for newer players and things like that. So balance is always a really tricky thing to discuss. I do think that perhaps they are getting to a point where it's gonna be difficult to balance everything because you have so many champions. The other argument, of course, would be that because you have so many champions, and because the metagame is consistently shifting, balance is less important than you might think. Because one week, one champion might be extremely dominant, and then the metagame shifts to the point where actually a counter is found, and maybe a new item is introduced that shifts things in favor of something else, and that's how the tier lists work. I mean, they shift around all the time as a result of that. I think the main problem with putting in so many champions is that really the reason they're doing it is to sustain their business model. Because, yes, while some people do save up 6.3k IP in order to do this every couple of weeks, a lot of other people will just buy the damn thing for 975 Riot points and may also buy it with a bundle. So that is a way for them to generate revenue, and as such it does encourage them to release more champions. Whereas, say, things like new maps, new modes, spectator, replay, observers, and things like that, that's less important because they probably won't sell those for anything. I think if they do, there'd probably be a bit of an outcry. Up until this point, League of Legends has had one of the most fair free-to-play models I can possibly think of, and if that were to start to change by saying you were restricting modes and things like that, then I think people would start to get a little bit annoyed. So I can see why, of course, they're prioritizing champions, but at some point they've got to start thinking long-term, is this business model actually sustainable? Because if you do keep on adding champions at that rate, no, it's probably not without a major balance pass. I mean, for instance, right now, stealth heroes are effectively worthless. The only one that's even vaguely useful, in my honest opinion, would have to be Twitch. The rest of them are just absolutely awful. If you look at the tier list right now, for instance, under hard to place on a team, you have Twitch, you have Evelynn, you have Shaco, so your three major stealth heroes, you just can't use them. It's as simple as that. Hell, Teemo stays in there, but he's not really a stealth hero. He's just got a stealth mode. So that's a real problem as well. You know, they've had to take a kind of hero, a stealth assassin, out of the game effectively by nerfing it to the point where it is just unusable because the stealth mechanics are broken and they can't figure out how to fix them. So I think at some point they do have to just stop and actually majorly rework the game, because if they just keep adding champions, it will eventually die. I mean, if they, for instance, end up losing out to Dota 2 if Dota 2 is well balanced. I mean, Dota, for instance, had 6 to 7 years of balancing behind it. If Dota 2 uses similar balancing, which it looks like it will since it's duplicating heroes, then it will get a bigger competitive scene, and eventually people may end up moving to it because they perceive it as the more balanced game, regardless of how much they've actually invested in League of Legends, and therein lies the problem for Riot. So it is something they have to consider at great length, and no, I don't think that releasing a new champion every 2 weeks is a particularly good idea, even if it does keep things a little bit fresh. I think they need to dial it back. This one comes in from Corey that says, usually before I buy a game, I go online to look for game reviews to see if I won't be wasting my money on cheap shovelware like Captain America, Green Lantern, what have you. However, it seems nowadays I can never find a good non-biased gaming review site. Sites like G4, IGN, and the like all seem to have a certain bias towards games they don't like. I can never trust a review from these sites anymore because of this. Metroid Other M, for instance, was given a 2 by G4 because the game tried something different. I played it myself and loved the game. Sure, it wasn't perfect, but it was much better than a 2 out of 5 by any means. Gaming magazines also have the same issue when it comes to a bias. A magazine by the name of PlayStation Magazine reviewed a bunch of games one month, and it really irked me when the games Captain America Super Soldier, Green Lantern Rise of the Manhunters, and Catherine were all rated as 7. As if there was no balance to the rating system at all, and I couldn't believe movie-based shovelware titles got the same score as an amazing puzzle game like Catherine. I understand everyone has different opinions on what games they like, but when you're a company that reviews games, you're supposed to be fair, and think if it would be fun to fans of the genre. Just because the game isn't another Call of Duty or Battlefield doesn't mean it's a bad game, and I feel like companies have forgotten this. In short, what is your opinion of the bias when it comes to game review sites and magazines, and is it fair for gamers to have such bias and unfairness in the reviews? Oh, that's a bloody minefield, isn't it, considering the industry that I'm in. Now, I never really review games, per se. I never call my videos reviews. For instance, WTF is not a review. Stop calling it a review. Because a review implies a certain amount of time spent and a certain degree of objectivity, which I have neither of. It's a first impression series, and that's all that it is. I think there's a couple of problems. And some of it is the perception of gamers, and some of it is the actual publications themselves. And this does vary from publication to publication. The first thing that I have a problem with is scores. This is something that you pointed out. You said that these 3 games got a 7. The problem is that these scores are freaking meaningless. They are absolutely 110% meaningless. They are not a solid, objective way to look at a game at all. There's all sorts of crazy examples of really bad shovelware games getting a similar rating to, say, a cult classic that some people liked and some people didn't. Score systems are awful, and as far as I'm concerned, every single reviewer should abandon score systems entirely, because it's trying to sum up a, hopefully, complex and insightful critique of a title that you're about to spend a lot of money on with an arbitrary number, and there is absolutely no consistency throughout the industry. I mean, they don't even use the same scoring systems, and even when they do, say a 10 in one magazine means something completely different in another. For some people, a 10 is perfection. Like, a game could not possibly attain this, so a 10 is never given out. For other people, it's, this game is really good, so I'm going to give it a 10. I mean, for God's sake, I remember, I think it was Nintendo Power gave one of the Super Mario games an 11. An 11, for God's sake. I mean, what does the scale even mean when magazines are doing things like that? Then we go on to, of course, the subject of Metacritic, which, as far as I'm concerned, is an evil that must be wiped off the face of the games industry, and indeed any other media industry. Metacritic has such control now over gaming reviews in general. For instance, did you know that there are some companies that will not allow a review of their game to be published unless it is given a certain rating in order to push the meta rating higher? It's effectively a review embargo, which ensures that all of the early reviews are at a certain level of positivity. And that, as far as I'm concerned, is manipulating the freedom of the press, and indeed the gaming press, to give good, accurate information to consumers, which means, of course, consumers end up getting misled and buying bad games. Did you also know that Metacritic actually weights its results, as in, a particular publication may get more influence on the meta rating than another publication, and this is of course entirely determined by Metacritic. They are the judge, jury, and executioner in this one. Did you also know that they will willingly convert certain ratings into their 100-point scale? For instance, if Giant Bomb gives something a 5-star rating, it will be converted to 100%, which will unduly affect the meta rating as well as give people a false impression. 100% is different to 5 stars. This is something you have to understand. There's 3 major rating scales outside of, say, Japan, and Famitsu that does 40. There's 5 stars, 10 out of 10, and the percentage scale. Yeah? And 100% means, as far as I'm concerned, that means without flaw. And 100% just is not given by anyone that uses the percentage system on that very basis. That said, of course, the other side of the percentage-based system is that what's the difference between 93 and 94%? What's the difference between 77 and 78? Is the one? No, there isn't. Which, again, is a reason why review scores are absolutely, entirely freaking stupid. It is horrible. It's a really stupid situation to be in. And I think that if they demolished that and effectively forced people to just read the review, then they would get an awful lot more out of it. You then go on to say about fans of the genre. This is actually a problem as well with objectivity, because there are times when, say, a magazine will give a review to the wrong person. I've heard of all sorts of sites, say, giving a review to an intern who just hasn't gotten the game. A prime example, in fact, one of the most glaring, would be the review of God Hand on IGN, where they gave it a 3. Now, God Hand is fantastic. I mean, it is just really great in all sorts of different ways, but the person they gave it to simply didn't like that kind of game, didn't even try to play it, and just threw it away, gave it a 3, which is disgraceful for that title. And there are other examples, of course, say, like fighting games being given to someone that's not experienced in fighting games. Like, I don't know what's going on. It's kind of like, you remember Yahtzee's review of Mortal Kombat? And if people take those reviews seriously, then I pity humanity. But whatever the case, if they did, then that review would, of course, be seen as highly negative. But in reality, that review said nothing useful, because Yahtzee is not a fighting game fan. So he doesn't really know anything about it. However, there is, of course, the flip side of that, which is, how can you give an objective review and then also say, well, I'm going to explain this from the perspective of a fan of the genre. The thing about fans of the genre is they are willing to overlook things that people who are perhaps less into the genre are not, because they have a higher tolerance for this kind of thing. And as a result, that can actually skew the view of the game and move it away from objectivity towards a more subjective kind of way of looking at it. Let's go back to the example of WTF is, for instance. Think about that. Puzzle games. Puzzle games are one of those genres I absolutely hate. I'm no good at them. I'm awful at them, in fact, to the point where I had to create an entire series about how awful I was at them. I'm much better at RTS, FPS, turn-based strategy, things like that, MOBA-style games. I'm awful at puzzles, and I'm awful at, say, point-and-clicks. I'm really bad at those games. So how can I objectively say whether a game is good or bad? In reality, I can't. The only thing I can do is try to explain the things that are objective. And by objective, I'm talking about, does the UI work? Is this game visibly buggy? Is it lacking variety? Stuff that you can just say. It's a 1 or a 0. Is it there? Is it not there? And then, of course, you go into the stuff that's part subjective. Does this feel good? Things like that. And how do you do that and be entirely objective? The answer is you kinda can't. You've got to be relative. You've got to compare it to, say, other things within the genre. You've got to try and say what's right and wrong with it. And then, of course, there's the entirely subjective stuff like, do I like this? I mean, do I like the graphics style? Is this something that I personally enjoy? It's really, really hard. I mean, doing good reviews is a very, very difficult thing, which is perhaps why you don't find all that many good reviews. But I would say that getting someone who is just a fan of the genre in order to do it is very much a double-edged sword. It can be positive because they bring a lot of knowledge and, of course, basis for comparison, because they can say, well, if we compare this mechanic to what happened in this game, for instance, it's not quite as good, blah-de-blah. And of course, the other side of the coin is they may excuse things that other fans would not. Perhaps they might overlook, this is one of the most critical things, they may overlook the learning curve. Let's just go for an example of Paradox Grand Strategy games. Let's say there was a fan of the genre that did reviews of that, and they overlook the learning curve. Or perhaps they actually make a comment. This is even worse. They make a comment on the learning curve and say, oh, the learning curve of this game is actually very, very shallow. It's nice and easy. And then, of course, when a non-fan picks it up, they find it's a brick wall, because that was relative to somebody that already knows what they're doing in grand strategy games. It's a minefield. Reviewing is actually really hard, and that's why I never want to do it. I don't want to do reviews. I just want to try and give people what is effectively a commentated demo. Like, here is the first 15 to 30 minutes of the game, or maybe I've moved in a little bit. Here's what I think about it at this stage. You can perhaps judge by watching the gameplay and by listening to my concerns, and you know what the kind of things that I like by now. You know my preferences. So if they match up to yours, and I say, well, I like this game, then you might as well. If they don't, and you really like puzzle games, and you see me failing at one, you say, oh, that looks like really great fun. That's the kind of thing that I would love, as opposed to TotalBiscuit, who finds it incredibly frustrating and wants to stab himself in the face with a fork. Then, cool. So, WTF is about offering an in-depth perspective that is entirely relative, that, you know, you yourself have to make this decision based on what you know about me and what you know about yourself. You know my preferences, you know yours, so compare the two. Jeff Gersman, who's probably my favorite reviewer, he's of the site giantbomb.com, by the way, and if you don't check that out, you're very, very silly. They actually do very similar stuff to what I do. They do something called Quick Looks, which they have been doing for longer than WTF is, by the way, so you should go and check them out. They do an amazing podcast called The Bombcast. Head over to giantbomb.com. Anyway, Jeff Gersman, one of my favorite reviewers, and he said that he wanted to make the byline matter again. And what that means is the person who is reviewing it should be a tool that can be used by the consumer to judge whether or not they will actually like a title. Because if you know the reviewer, and you know what the reviewer likes, what the reviewer doesn't like, his preferences, his background, his history, then you can more accurately judge by his review, regardless of how subjective it is, whether or not you will actually like the game. And that, to me, is the way that reviews need to go. And that means we need to have highly respected figureheads and writers and personalities be involved in the reviewing, instead of just sites that pump out stuff which is effectively faceless. Okay, folks, that is actually me done for the day, because we talked about reviews quite a lot there. We've actually run over 17 minutes, so there you go. And there will not be a mailbox for a little while, because I am at Gamescom, going to bring you some great stuff. Yes, it's going to be awesome, and now I kind of need to sleep. So I shall see you next time.